Hello, people. This is Maya. This is TN Politics with Maya. And today with us, we have Alva Finn, a woman with a strong voice, we just discovered.
Yes, yeah. I've been told I have a strong voice.
Well, metaphorically, that's a good thing. In reality, that's even a better thing. Let's start from the start. This is a podcast where we explore the relation between power and empowerment, the relationship between value-based leadership and management, and all of that in the context of the EU bubble. So can you tell me, what do you do in here? How did you end up in the EU bubble?
I came to Brussels about 13 years ago to do an internship, like many people, with the European Economic and Social Committee, actually. And yeah, I had a number of roles in different non-governmental organizations. So I used to work at Mental Health Europe. We know each other because I was the Secretary General of Social Platform. I worked for Save the Children. And now I am the Executive Director of the European Liberal Forum, which is the European level political foundation of the Liberal family. So linked to the ALDE party and also the Renew Europe group in the Parliament.
Mm-hmm. That sounds very complicated. Can you elaborate a bit more on that last part? So what is ELF? What do you do? Why do you exist as an organization?
So the European political foundations are actually regulated. We get a grant from the European Parliament. We're linked to this whole system of European political parties. And the idea behind us and them is that, we bring together the political families, so you have national political parties, but also so they can link to their like-minded colleagues at European level. And people always ask me this, so I'll just explain it, which is the difference between the ALDE party and the Renew Europe group. The ALDE party is the political party, so all of the liberal political parties, including prime ministers and national MPs, etc., they're all part of the ALDE party, whereas the Renew Europe group has ALDE MEPs in it, but it's not limited to the Liberals. It also has, for example, Renaissance, which is Macron's party, and it's only the MEPs. So it's the group that of like-minded individuals in the European Parliament. So that's a bit the difference. And then ELF sits within that by linking up NGOs with liberal values, liberal institutions, think tanks, NGOs, and also political foundations that are linked to the national parties. And it's a bit like the networks that we used to manage. We have members from all across Europe, but also beyond. So we're not just in the European Union. We also have members in Georgia, for example, Serbia. So places where they're looking to join the EU. We have quite a large membership. We're like 56 members now.
It must be challenging to be a liberal in Georgia or in Serbia. Now I'm thinking about it. Now you mention it. It's how can you support your members actually as a network? Because the idea that you are a representative body, so you are also overarching values, etc. But at the end of the day, you have to support those local parties to develop so they can make you stronger as a network.
Yeah, we really support their foundations and the thinking, behind. And there's places where there are not very popular or defunct liberal parties now, where the foundations are kind of keeping thought going on at a liberal values level. They write things about entering the single market when they come into the EU. They write things about human rights and individual freedoms and this kind of thing. So there are places where that kind of thinking, research behind politics is really important still. So it can be challenging. And the other thing is sometimes there are many, there are many liberal parties in some places, not necessarily all linking up together, which is also challenging,
Well, that in a way it's your job as well, to try to unite them, to create links, connections.
Yeah, and some of their forms of democracy are newer, as you know. So also just helping to encourage them to kind of live those democratic values, Renew and the ALDE party are very well known for kind of anti-corruption, transparencies, good governance, rule of law, institutional factors that really are the cornerstone of successful democratic countries that join the EU. And they need all of these things in order to join. We just actually welcomed our first Ukrainian foundation as well. So yeah, we'll be focusing on all of these kind of issues about how to get them into the European Union. We focus a lot, for example, on the methodology behind enlargement and how to kind of make it a bit attractive again to people in these countries who have been waiting for so long. You know, the process has stagnated.
Yeah.
I mean, you're from Bulgaria, you know, like how long it takes. Yeah. And the route there is complicated, and sometimes you're not getting anything for years. And what we would be proposing is that you kind of accrue some rights of members and some links to the European Union even before you become a member, so that, you know, there's a bit more carrot and less stick.
And that people actually see this as a positive process, not as a process of being excluded from somewhere. Now you're mentioning the Bulgaria-EU relation. In the last, I think, 2 months, there's so much Euroscepticism, more than usual, let's put it like that. We are known for being a bit more Eurosceptical than the average European. But it's been so many years, like 10 years ago, Bulgaria started the process of joining the Schengen space.
Yes.
It's been so bad. And it's bad as a process, in my opinion, but it's also been really unprofessionally communicating on all levels. And now so many people just hear that they're not good enough for Europe. And they're like, well, then I don't want to be part of Europe as well. And that, I think, is being used and abused very, very, very efficiently by the right-wing parties who are trying to just, every time when they hear somebody being even slightly Eurosceptic, they're like, go on, tell me more.
Yes, exactly.
We need somehow to reshape this with a bit of a marketing pinch, that it's something good to be part of the European Union. And it needs to be
exactly. That's the whole
way.
point behind this. And also, it's not that you can accrue rights and then, you know, you can you can go back on things like, you know, corruption or rule of law, and then you'll keep those things. No, they can also be taken away, you know, and there's a little bit of more dynamism in the process overall. So we call that staged integration, basically. So you're integrating step by step rather than this essentially just in the waiting room, and then you're either a member or you're not. And it's not just right-wing parties in Bulgaria, you know. Enemies of Europe are using the fact that this process has taken a long time, that there's a lack of trust in it, in order to do a lot of propaganda around, you know, spheres of influence. And we're going to lose that game if we continue in the way that we have been. So yeah, I think sometimes we really see things in Brussels just from our own point of view, but that's the beauty of European political foundations like the European Liberal Forum. We have members who are involved in our governance who can say, no, but you know, you see things from the inside of the club. But what about if you're outside the club and someone else is coming to you and saying, join my club? You'll get there faster if you join, you know, us. You know, if you side with Russia, if you side with China, we'll give you this immediately, you know. So I don't want it to be transactional. That's absolutely not the point. Like, we still have to be values based. You still have to pass the threshold for certain aspects of membership. But yeah, what's been key in our learning is we had a lot of workshops, and we met with our members from inside the European Union and from outside to figure out, you know, how do you make this system better? And we need to do that now, because there's also key elections happening in some places where, you know, there really is that battle of influence happening now. And if we don't improve the process and have this kind of like waiting room, we're going to lose people along the way.
And there's 40% of the world going on elections this year.
Yes.
I read the first days of the 2024 year, I read this interesting report by the McKinsey company. So it was I never knew that it's possible to have a year with so many people going to vote. And it sounds, I think, also to put it in context with the Russia-Ukraine situation, with everything happening in the Middle East, with the post-pandemic thing. So it sounds like it's a really important year. And having said all that, how do you lead an organization like ELF in that very important year? Because I think a lot of expectations, people, for example, I myself am putting a lot of expectation for this year, for the elections to go good, whatever that means. And I think that a lot of people have that hope, but also have a bit of a fear. So how do you lead an organization in such a important time?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hope for the best and you plan for the worst. That's always what you do as a leader,
Okay.
right? So, like, yeah, I think a lot of people now, there's a big poll has just been released that has the far right gaining traction. Not they won't be the biggest or anything like that, but they'll be gaining seats. And yeah, that has some people terrified. But there are still many months before the election and still time to turn narratives around. And I think the main thing is to be self-aware about your narrative and who's listening and why, because populists have a much easier job. You know, they say things that have no basis in fact, but are very emotive and fear-driven, and
they tickle your emotions.
And then they don't, they rely on people not being informed enough to check those facts. And it's what Trumpism is based on. It's we've seen a few recent examples as well, which I think should just give many European political parties a kick up the arse to go and do their job properly, and not as well fall into the trap of following their narratives. A lot of people, I think, try to gouge out the issues that are close to the far right and make them a bit neutral, but we've seen that has not worked in some places recently. So it is a fine line, I think, particularly for liberals, which are more in the center, and maybe sometimes have like approaches to migration that are, they would say they're pragmatic. But we saw that didn't really work out, for example, in the Netherlands, where you're promoting a pragmatic approach, and then actually people are so anti-migration that they just go straight for the right. So yeah, there's a lot of dynamics happening. I think that many people, probably more people, will go to the polls because of what's happening in Ukraine. Will it be the number one issue that like people vote on? I'm not sure. Maybe in some countries, for example, in Hungary and Poland, where it's closer to the conflict, maybe we'll have people voting like kind of pro-Ukrainian. So it'll be a really interesting election year. I think we'll still have, a kind of moderate majority in the parliament, but it will make decision making even more complex. It's already very complex, and it's going to become more complex. So I think that's what people need to be prepared for, and maybe some actors will need to speak to people in a different way and reach out to people that they hadn't been in touch with before. I think, I've been in the kind of Brussels lobby space for a long time, and in the last few years maybe I haven't been really getting in touch with ECR because you didn't need to. They weren't part of the majority, and but you'll have to go back to ECR now, and EPP, and maybe you'll have to look at things from a more economic perspective. But I've always been a fan of just going to meet people where they are and talking to people in a way that aligns with their interests. You can say the same thing to the same person, but in a different way and using a different kind of value structure in order to influence them. So yeah, for many people, it will be about tailoring messages to people they wouldn't otherwise talk to. And probably you can agree on the same thing, just for different reasons, which, many people in this town, I think they know the idea of that. But when it actually comes down to how they do their communications, their strategies and everything, they just completely miss out on other kind of narratives and stories,
and other opinions as well sometimes, because I think it's very easy as well to just decide to be in your EU bubble. I think that there's not one EU bubble, by the way. There are different bubbles within the bubble.
Yes, yeah.
And you can just decide to be around
Venn
people
diagrams,
who agree with you. Yeah,
exactly.
Speaking of those bubbles, how do you see the EU bubble? There's so many perks of being a leader in here, of being a policymaker, being involved in so many different important decisions for Europe. On the other hand, there's so many gaps, in my opinion. So how do you see it?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's actually been interesting because I moved from what was a very like Brussels-based network to the European Liberal Forum, which really we do a lot of political projects at national level. So yeah, I was traveling a lot more and talking to people. And also it's funny because we do like booths where we present our research to people who vote.
Actual people,
yeah,
humans.
I mean, everybody's an actual person. So I think sometimes people say, "Oh, we're not talking to real people. People in the bubble aren't real people." Of course, they're real people, but they're much more informed, and that's the difference. So we have this big project that we do with one of our members in Poland called the Freedom Games. And it was just before the Polish elections, actually. So that was really interesting to see. It's a big kind of political, democratic sort of project. And like thousands of people come and listen to panels about EU issues, but also Polish issues, and, you know, from all different political angles. And it's really to encourage people to get engaged. Mm-hmm. So yeah, for me, I think that's always a reality check when I go and you try and translate the work, which is often, you know, it's quite technical, to these people. But they were interested. You know, they took a lot of the publications. Some people would always be like, "Is this free?" And I'm like, "Yes, it's free. It's for you. It's about teaching and providing this liberal perspective to people." So yeah, I really enjoy that part of my role because it gets you out of the bubble. It gets you out of the bubble, and I think that was the whole reason for European political foundations, to kind of like create these links at national level.
Mm-hmm. Can you describe what a day of the executive director of ELF is like? What do you do apart from, because I'm sure this is like the cherry on the top is the meeting the real people, whatever that means, as we said. But what do you do? Like, how do you lead a political foundation?
So we have a few different things, and we have different identities as well. We have kind of like a think tank, an in-house think tank that does things that are related to what's happening in Brussels. We really focus a lot on technology and politics. So we call this technopolitics, techno-sustainability. So a technology-forward approach to adapting to and challenging and combating climate change. We do a lot of stuff on security, defense, what that looks like in terms of also enlargement, geopolitics in general, and the approach. That's very normal think tank fodder. And then we've added on, because I had a background in social rights, human rights, and democracy. We've also added another area where we talk about things like women in politics, diversity in politics. We'll probably do an issue where we talk about, market-based solutions to some of the social issues that we are facing. Also, how technology can help in those things. So that's what the kind of think tank thing does. And we support the Renew Europe group, when they're thinking about legislation, or, for example, the ALDE manifesto. We were also involved in the drafting of that, coming up with ideas, like novel ideas that can go into that and can be put to voters, basically. At national level. So any day I could be going to a manifesto drafting committee and presenting some of our work. Other times we're doing projects as well with our members. So some of them group together and they say, okay, we want to talk about, the liberal approach to climate change. How do we do that? And then maybe like 4 or 5 of them will write a research paper, then we'll have an event. And that also helps them and their party, communicate what's happening, what their party is engaged at Brussels level. We do a lot of events, workshops, things like that. We talk to the parties. Other times I'll be on things like a podcast. We have our own podcast, so I'll do a bit of a plug, which is called Liberal Europe. So it's all about a liberal approach, and it also talks about things like, activists in Poland and how they responded to recent developments. It talks a lot about the rule of law. We also sometimes have academics talking about democracy in the United States. It's a very diverse group of people who are talking about a variety of things, but from a liberal perspective and a European perspective. Recently, I also went to Senegal, and I met with Renew do a meeting with African liberals. So that was very interesting, like to see the culture there and what we can connect on and how we can, strengthen the ties between Africa and Europe. So yeah, it's very diverse, but
very
there's
dynamic.
Never a dull day. Lots of travel. But I think it's important to go out and really talk about the European project to people and what it means, because I think sometimes when you don't do that, you really anticipate the response from the electorate. Like, I think we're going to see that, for example, on climate issues. We've really anticipated, okay, they think we're all in agreement about how to fix this. No, we're not. We're not. And maybe the parties might be now, but people, I think a lot of people haven't really been asked what they want to happen. And people, and not to say, like, I'm not anti-climate action or anything like that, but how we decide what we're going to do is very important if we don't want a backlash, So I think that conversation is going to be had now. The Green Deal is already in place. So how it's implemented, how quickly, and the kind of like
what's the way?
Things you will have to sacrifice in order to get there. And I mean, I've been involved in projects where we've looked at what people in vulnerable situations think about the trade-offs, and they are willing to make them, as long as there is also kind of like a just aspect of that. So yes, I'm willing to give up my car, but what about the taxes that these people who are high polluters are going to pay? So these kind of things. So that kind of social justice aspect of the transition, I think we'll see that play out in the elections overall.
Going back to your job and the diversity and the dynamics of it, I'm wondering, has it been helpful that you're a woman, or has it been more of a, let's put it, not helpful? Or can you judge that? Is it something that you have thought about? Because I mean, speaking about women in politics, for example, or women in power, or women in decision-making places, every time there is a meeting in Davos, every time there is this COP meetings, and we speak about women in politics, and there are not a lot of women even in those pictures, which are the representative pictures. When we speak about representation, I am personally not happy with how things are, and I always want to ask women who are in this kind of places, have you considered your gender, your situation, as helpful or as a challenge so far in your career?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people do challenge you in a way that I think that they wouldn't challenge men. Like, since I had this job, actually, people have told me I'm too young for the role, when I'm like, I don't know what that means, because I'm not too young to have it, and I definitely don't think that people would say that to a man,
and it's not considered to be a compliment, I think, in most of the
I think if someone says you're too young for something, I'm not sure if that's a compliment. Yeah, I think but I think there has to be gender balance in organizations at leadership level. So, for example, we have actually we have more women than men on our board currently. Gender balance is one of the things that's in our statutes. And yeah, now it just happens that I lead the organization, but it has been led by a woman before. So yeah, I think there are, and yeah, it was interesting because I was at a rally for Europe over the weekend, and I was discussing the research on leadership qualities between men and women, and then I was discussing, what are those qualities, and then someone said, "Isn't that really essentialist?" And I just thought, well, we are a product of our gender, and many of us are performing our gender, and some of those things are performed in our leadership styles. I would say, yes, I behave a little bit different. I've been told many times that I behave differently to men. I have a much more kind of like transparent leadership style. I always check in with everybody to see like how they're feeling after big changes have happened. And I think sometimes men just don't do that. Yeah, it's, yeah, we have different ways of being leaders, and I think you need those different things to come together in one organization. So yeah, you need to find also men who complement the way that you lead.
And they're not scared by it.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I agree with that. No, we're part of a program for empowering women into politics at the European Liberal Forum. It's called the Alliance of Her. It's very successful. It's had a number of quite high-profile women from it. Basically, it runs a kind of like academy to help women get into politics. And during the last elections, many of them were elected as MEPs. We're hoping for the same. And it really teaches women many tools about how to get into politics. And one of the things that I would like it to focus on now going forward is, not just how you get in there, but then also how you stay. And I think that's part of
very important.
Part of that is being authentic and not leading like a man, because there's quite a lot of toxic behavior, I think, in politics, because it is a high stress job. There have been very, a lot of reports recently from the European Parliament about the treatment of the staff and all of this kind of thing. And for me, I think the best thing to do is go in with a strong team who you treat really well, and who will stay around you, and you'll be protected by them, But not a lot of people, a lot of people don't treat their staff like that as in politics. But that's what I try to do anyway. So yeah, making sure everybody's paid properly, there are clear rules, you give them the right days off, you protect them from, too much work, all of these kind of things. So I don't think all leaders do that. And I think definitely that I'm a woman, I'm more caring in terms of how I treat staff. And also from the background that we come from, this in being in NGOs and that really focus on, quality employment and things like that. I really want to live that in how I lead organizations. So these things are really important to me. If I see someone's underpaid, I want to fix that. I make sure that people take time off, these kind of things. So, and that also the structure is fair as well. That there's no favoritism, these kind of things. So yeah, I think not everybody cares about that. And some men do, and some women do, but I think more women have that kind of like soft skill approach. As I said, there's a lot of research on the types of behaviors that men and women show in leadership, and the benefits of women being in leadership positions are, conflict resolution and prevention, those kind of like soft, more caring skills. They also take on a needs-based approach usually. So yeah, really looking at what people need and trying to deliver that, but also for organizations overall. We also want to be over prepared when we go into things. So we'll prepare for hours and hours and hours to get ready for something that maybe our male counterparts just go in and kind of wing. But we also sometimes lack confidence, for example.
I've read so many articles in the last maybe, let's say, 6 months on women in leadership position, how women negotiate for salaries, how do you do conflict resolution if you're a woman in power versus a man in power, things like that. And of course, you cannot generalize that it's always
no, it's not always
gender focused leaders. Women are better leaders just because of the gender or something like that. You don't do that. But I think that the lack of enough women in power, let's generalize, is quite visible. And then on the other hand, the amount of happy teams and impact and good results that when a woman is in charge of an organization versus the other type of leadership, let's put it like that, it's also quite visible in different organizations, and in my personal opinion. I remember the story when you were the Alliance of Her is what the program is.
Yeah.
I should have known about that years ago. I was part of a committee for local elections, maybe 6-7 years ago, really, really, really long time ago, in my hometown of Varna. And I really wanted to run for the city council because I was working with them for a while in different roles. Again, from a social perspective, trying to convince them that social issues should not be just charity based, that these are like policies, etc., etc. And I had quite a good case for my campaign. And I had these open days where I would go in the sea garden and I would just have a flip chart and do like problem solving. People would come and they would tell me what kind of situation they want to solve, and we would try to do it together. The amount of people who came to me during these open days and told me that I should stay at home and have kids. I have 3 kids. I had 3 kids by that point, so I'm not sure if they were implying I should have more or not. You cannot imagine how many times. And I swear 99% of them were doing it out of care and love. Like they were not mean, being like,
don't get involved in this. It's really,
Oh, it was so, no, now when you're just, when you mentioned this, and the first few times when somebody would come and just say, you should just not be into politics. It's a dirty game. Go have kids, be a happy wife, whatever. And my husband was supporting me, like right next to me. And he was like, oh, wow, okay, don't. That's an interesting case.
I mean,
I think a lot of women are still facing that. Maybe not that direct.
Of course, yes.
But it's a bit of a stigma that it's a stressful job. Therefore, it's a man's job because men handle their emotions better. They're more like organized, and women are too emotional. So just it's a man's job to do politics.
Yeah. I mean, I think that. So I was very pleased to see how many women are on the lists actually in ALDE party members for the European elections. I mean, the first like 6 or 7 that announced all had women who were at the top of the lists, the lead candidate. So I think that's interesting. So I do think that is changing, where people really, and actually it can be beneficial for you to have more women on your list because then people vote more for your list because they see themselves in the list.
Yeah.
They see themselves in the list. And it's been really interesting for me to be part of this kind of movement for more women in politics. But that being said, it's still, as you say, like a dirty, like non-inclusive game. And sometimes what I don't like is that women politicians are literally competing with each other in their own parties, you know? So if you only have like 2 or 3 women on a list, well, then they're competing with each other really because people kind of see them the same. And I was sitting beside, I was doing a panel with one of the heads of lists from Denmark, who was a woman, and she got this question from the media being like, oh, well, there's this other woman who's on another list and she's kind of like young and, you know, into climate issues like you. What do you think about that? And she's like, what about the 50 million other men who are all on the other lists? Are they competing with each other? Like, yes, we're like, she's in another party, but like, she's the only other person who has a kind of a profile like me. And there's only 2 of us. But what about all these other white men who are on the lists? So again, trying to create sisterhood within these kind of dynamics. And that's what the Alliance of Her is also about, which is creating this kind of network of women from other places as well. They're all like from all across Europe. So they have a support network when, you know, the bad things happen to them, which it's true that like you have to create like kind of this protected environment and then teach them the tools of how to deal with, you know, politics, as you say, is a dirty game. And it's even worse for women and other people in minority situations. So we have some quite high profile women stepping back from roles like Deputy Prime Minister, you know, we have like Jacinda Ardern, for example, but we also had Sigrid Kaag, who was the leader of D66 recently, stepping back. So, and that happens in other atmospheres as well. So for example, in finance or very large global corporations, sometimes women will get to the top and then you almost immediately see, oh, I don't really like it up here because it's not an inclusive atmosphere and I have to behave in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable and I don't feel authentic because I can't lead as a woman would. I have to lead like in this aggressive kind of sometimes quite competitive atmosphere, and then they kind of want to leave already. So that was something, you know, when we're in Alliance of Her now, we're trying to bring in that corporate experience to see, because they're further ahead actually. If you look at the Gender Equality Index, which is run by AGA, who you will also know, which is the Agency on Gender Equality from the European Union. They have this index, and power is where we're doing the worst, actually. Out of all of the other sectors, we're doing the worst on power. You know, the rates are around 33 or 34 to 67 66 men versus women in ministerial positions and in the parliament. So, I mean,
it's a big difference.
We're not even anywhere near half and half.
We're not. And I think that there is also the myth that if there is a difference, it's actually not that bad. It just must be not a big difference. And I was discussing, so the gender pay gap in different countries is different. And obviously it depends how you measure it. It depends. My favorite example was that 0.0 gender pay gap difference is when you have no women. Because you don't have a difference at all. Yeah. So there's no gap. But then, so it really depends on how you measure it. But what I was saying is that I was speaking with a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, and we were discussing the gender pay gap in his country. And it was, I think, 11%, which it's for a particular sector. And he said, well, it's not that bad. And I said, yeah, but it's like, what do you mean?
You need a strategy to close that.
Yeah, the idea is that you don't have that. It shouldn't be 50% or 40% or 30%. But 11, it's still a lot. Like it's 11%. There is a difference. And it's based on gender. And when I was discussing it with him, eventually I realized that he's coming closer to my point. But he was saying, it's not that bad. Come on, it's not that bad. So I think that it's also the case with the percentage of women in power versus
you should have asked him, do you want your pay salary to be reduced by 11%?
I think so. I think if it's the other way around, it will be a big difference, 11%. Yeah. Well, it's a funny thing. Well, it's very subjective to say, because of course it depends from the sector, it depends from the country. But still, I would very strongly suggest we just have more women in power in the different sectors, in the different countries, and that would be a big change and a better change.
Better change. And also there's research on gender balance in decision making as well, and better decision, it leads to better decisions, including there's been a lot on like boards, C-suite level, and that is also meaning you shouldn't have all boards of women either, because you need the two sides, the two perspectives, of course, and not just women and men. You should also have other forms of diversity, like I think it's a huge difference now that I sit as an ex officio member on the board of ALDE, when we have sometimes someone from Liberal International coming. The president at the moment is from Morocco, and you get this outside perspective. We can just be talking away about all the European things, and then someone comes in and it's like, but actually this is the African perspective on the EU perspective, and you're like, oh yeah. There has to be ways of you to reach out beyond your own kind of bubble. Otherwise, it just leads to poor decision making, and a very limited perspective. It's kind of like, when I always say, like, everybody can do with a bit of therapy, and not because you're unwell or whatever, because I think you can make better decisions, because you only have your own perspective, and another perspective is valuable. Another perspective will always show you, okay, am I thinking about this in the right way?
We did a really deep dive into that with so the episode, which will be it's already recorded, but it's not published because we want to have it around the end of February. It's with a great Ukrainian woman. I was very happy to work with for a while with her, and we were discussing not only what has been happening in Ukraine in the last 2 years, but also how do you make sure that what's happening in Europe actually is representative enough that it also covers Eastern Europe? Because I think that in so many cases, when we have European decisions, they're kind of Western, Northern European decisions, and then Central Europe can kind of jump in with a representative, but then Eastern Europe is really not there in many of the cases. And I remember when we were discussing, when you were back in Social Platform and I was back in ESPD, and we were trying to have discussions on the response of the invasion. And I was feeling like that for a while, because I was one of the few representatives from Eastern Europe in the room in many discussions. And I would hear really good proposals, but they were missing context somehow. And not from you or not from anyone in particular, but just the whole discussion is not full. Because it just covers part of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. I mean, we hear it from all our Eastern European member states now that they knew what was coming. And the rest of us all were like, no, that can't possibly happen, can it? You know,
Yeah.
Don't look at that. You know, but yeah, as I said, it makes Europe a very complicated place to
It is.
do business and to do politics, because reaching these kind of decisions, even within a party system, you know, sometimes I call Renew Europe is like a parliament within a parliament. You know, it's
That's good.
Even
That's
to
good to hear.
make decisions within your own group is difficult. And I mean, just even listening to the perspectives on, we talked about Gaza earlier, just even trying to reach a decision on these aspects of things, even within the group, is very difficult. So, yeah, I think having men and women, but other forms of, you know, or other perspectives is important. So, yes, gender balance is great, but I'm also thinking now beyond that. Like, how do you bring other forms of diversity into politics? And it's not only women who are left outside. It's just many people. I mean, we have worked in and been part of the disability movement, and I don't know if you saw recently that the first person with Down syndrome was elected recently. Very, very inspiring. But still, there are so many people who, if I said that, they'd be like, "What?" You know, and because they don't know what the real lived experience of a person who has Down syndrome is, and their lives, because they're not visible in politics or on television or anywhere. So there's a lot of these. I'm always, because I used to work at Social Platform, I always remind people, okay, it's not just about gender equality. We're making progress on gender equality, and then there's other forms of equality that we are not making very much progress on. And maybe we've made progress on LGBTI or LGB things, and not so much on T or I, you know? So like seeing an inclusive way of looking at things, I think, is important. And you can so easily just close your board by being like, oh, I have all men and women, it's fine.
It's a good step for start.
And then you have it's a good start, but then I think you need to broaden your perspective, because otherwise we'll just keep coming. Yes, more inclusive, but like, if we're going to go inclusive, let's go real inclusive, you know.
Okay. Well, look, I want to make a very quick pause speaking about inclusion. There is no better time than to have a minute about something that I already told you about. It's called Barabar, and every time during every episode, I remind all the listeners and viewers about this amazing game. It's actually produced by a foundation working on human rights, and this is their social enterprise part, where they fund their other activities on human rights and non-formal education. So you can decide to face a challenge and save the world, more or less, together with 75 different characters, entrepreneurs, activists, businessmen, artists. So you can decide every time I say Emma Watson and Frida Kahlo, but also, as the game is available in English, Dutch, French, and wait for it, Bulgarian, you can choose local cards as Esma Rejepova, for example, or Valia Balkanska, who is a great folk singer from Bulgaria. And actually her song is sent to space to float around and greet the aliens if they ever decide to join us for human rights issues. So you can order Barabar on barabar.eu, and you can have a great game with your team or with your family, and try to learn more about human rights. Going back to human rights in the context of the upcoming election. So I want to circle back from where we started. So let's hope that we have a lot of diversity, visible diversity in the lists. I really hope so, and I cross my fingers for that. But how do you think the Commission's direction and the Parliament's direction will change after June? What do you think will be visible as in change within the Parliament and within the Commission as policies?
Yeah, as I said, I think we will probably see more right-leaning politicians, even right of EPP coming, big-ish gains for ECR, but also ID. We also need to see what the kind of who joins what group. There are, it seems like, a lot of non-aligned or independent people also going to be running and probably getting seats. So there'll be a bit of battle for their hearts and minds. It's already happening, you know. There's all this behind the scenes stuff going on. I mean, it happens every time. So that will be happening, and then we hope, I suppose, basically that we continue Renew in whatever format that it continues in to still be the third biggest, and still having at least, you know, a moderate majority to be able to decide things. However, I do feel like there will be more conversation around how we address climate change. It won't be as easy to make decisions. I mean, we're already seeing a little bit the majority fray now. Like there have been key examples now where I think there's been a change of tone in some of the parties. So we saw that for the restoration legislation, EPP taking, you know, a quite different line actually, and even some within EPP going against that to make sure that it was adopted. So yeah, that's likely to play out even more. So yeah, there'll be some things where we won't come to a decision as easily. And yeah, I would imagine probably some of the key pieces of the Green Deal that we have from before probably wouldn't be decided on in the next. I mean, some people also are saying, you know, it's been a huge period of regulation, maybe now focusing more on implementation, and how to do that, given like the sheer volume of things that now the Commission has to monitor implementation of, will be, yeah, very.
Maybe they have to think about more practically about things.
Yes. I think there'll be a big focus on industry now going forward. I mean, we already saw that late in this cycle after COVID and after the financial crisis and after, you know, of course now industry is kind of saying we've been a bit neglected. So I think that's good, but trying to also find an inclusive approach to that too, that aligns with the Green Deal will be important. There are many geopolitical issues that weren't around the beginning of the last mandate. I think we'll have to be even more geopolitical going forward, and I think we need to be forceful on that. I mean, this whole discussion around strategic autonomy, we're only beginning that now, and we need to really think about how and where the boundaries of that start and end, because having an autonomous Europe in some fields and having our own resources in certain matters is a completely different. I mean, we can't really create all the energy that we need to create for ourselves. So we will always be a little bit dependent, but it's about diversifying our access, you know. So how far to go on some of these aspects of strategic autonomy, which really cut across all policies now, and particularly with China on the rise and a very aggressive Russia. How do we deal with these things? Where does strategic autonomy end and begin? Where are the red lines as well for competition? All of these things, I think, will become much more debated. And the far right don't have the same viewpoint on things. And they have different friends to us. From the center or the left or the right. You know, the far right have friends in other countries who are maybe not so friendly to us.
No, I think that's a bit of a high school American sitcom where there is one guy who's friends with the bully, and you need to be very careful how you talk to them. That's a bit the setting. When I was listening to you now, you draw a very good short analysis of which problematic milestones we need to address in the next mandate. I'm just wondering how, let's say, Polish doctor from a small village listening to that would see the relevance, or my dad who works in a supermarket back in my hometown, or I don't know, a sailor from Portugal, you know, because we want those people to vote. We don't want only the our bubble to vote. We want all of them to be informed and to go and make a choice. And I'm just wondering, how do we make them interested, and how do we make them we can make is a bad word, but how do we seduce them? into European policy matters.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people who are, I don't know, working in supermarkets or etc., they want to know that the economy is strong. So a focus on industry, I think, is important. Also, we can't deal with the challenges that face us alone. We need a very strong Europe, a much more, a stronger Europe on the global stage. I mean, that is clear now after Ukraine. So I think that would resonate with any Polish person who is, one of the people who's probably having to deal with some of the after effects of the war. So yeah, these are all things that are impacting their lives. And then also, I think we need to make the case of how Europe has responded to the crises that we are seeing now. I mean, it's been very strong in some aspects, which is quite different to times past. Mm-hmm. We've learned some really important lessons, and we have Next Generation EU. It's so funny, like when you go out and you talk to people, and people actually know what that is as a policy, as a thing. It unleashed huge amounts of investment and financing, and was a massive brand. Mm-hmm. So yeah, like I went to Romania for the USR Congress, which is one of the liberal parties in Romania, and they were literally talking about the recovery and resilience plan for Romania. Like I'd never heard that before, where an actual piece of a tool from the European toolbox is spoken about in a campaign setting like that. So I think, Europe does things that are really important for people. I think there's no doubt in my mind that Europe helped with the response to COVID, with vaccines, but also with these recovery plans, which we wouldn't be seeing the recovery that we see now from that. Mm. And of course, we now are facing the crisis in Ukraine. Again, the EU has played a key role in supporting Ukraine and making sure most of the member states are together in their support for Ukraine. I mean,
most are.
Imagine if we weren't all the 27 member states together and everybody went it alone.
Yeah.
Ukraine probably wouldn't. Would they still be fighting? I don't know. And also, they're fighting for principles that we are espousing in the European Union. Like they have European and Ukrainian flags, some of the soldiers. So they're really fighting for the European Union as a concept. So yeah, these are the things that I would say to local voters. You might not see it all the time, but the European Union is working for you. If you're a farmer in one of these places, what's in your paycheck comes from the concept of the European Union. So yeah, about translating it to people, I think that's really important.
I hope it's enough time there's enough time to do that, because I think that all of those crises, they took so much of the public space and the public capability to take more and more information people just need a break somehow, which I don't think you get a break in life at all. But I'm just there's been so many crises in the last 4 or 5 years, not only talking in the concept of the parliament, but in general, it's been tough, a few tough years for Europe. And I think that it was a good response on all of them, but it's still very exhausting to have a good response after a good response.
I know, but what if it hadn't been there? That's what I always say to people, like I'm on this, an expert group on the future of cohesion policy, which, we used to work on when we were doing things around deinstitutionalization. And we are always coming back to, why is cohesion important to the European Union? And most people don't really know what cohesion policy is, but they know about the roads that are built using cohesion policy. And it is sometimes difficult to explain these overall concepts, but that I think we have to try, and just the example of like Ireland was by far in a way the poorest member state that joined at that time. And it has catapulted it into a stage of development in, 20, 30 years, which is incredible. In some ways, we could be seen as the most, successful development project in the world.
Yeah.
And people often take that for granted.
We need to speak about that more, I think, because if you compare the amount of Euroscepticism with Euro realism and Euro optimism, your optimism, I think, is the tiniest bit. I think that every time we try to be kind or nice or fair with the European Union, we're realistic, but we're not optimistic. And then on the other hand, when you're skeptical, like they go really, really skeptical. They don't go realistic.
Yeah, so but that's why I like this. I like this. Like I think that skepticism is an interesting intellectual tool, but not if you're just thinking about problems, because those problems exist already. You know, a lot of the problems that are facing Europeans would have been there even if the European Union didn't exist. You know, many people are struggling with the impact of globalization, but actually, the single market protects you from that. You know, so sometimes I think it's about pointing out, but that's actually not anything to do with the European Union. You know? The European Union actually helps you in this way. But we're used to thinking those things through, whereas a lot of people aren't. And you have to, we work on so many different things. That's also the scope of the European Union is so complicated. But yeah, just pointing out what the good things are, I think, is a place to start. And asking, what if you had to go on COVID on your own?
Yeah. No, that doesn't sound amazing.
Would we all be still in lockdown? I don't know. Like it just
4 years later.
Yeah. Look, no. I don't believe that. I'm not. I'm not causing a conspiracy theorist or anything. But we definitely would have been in lockdowns for longer because we wouldn't have been able to buy the vaccines like that. You know. So
talking about the good stuff, do you consider yourself to be a good leader?
I think I'm a human leader. I try to do everything in terms of monitoring impact, you know, so I set myself goals and things like that, and then I check in on those goals. So when I achieve them, then yeah, I think that's how you do a good job. Everybody has different like types of leadership, I think, and I like to be quite evidence-based. I also like to be quite human. Like I often tell my staff, we're not doctors, you know. If you're sick, then don't work. You know, if you can't do something, then we'll find a solution. So yeah, I think I'm quite flexible in my leadership style. I also do it in a values-based way. As I said, like I try to live the values that I'm dedicated to, so that I'm not a hypocrite. You know, I'm pro-European, pro-equality, and I try to live those in the way that I lead. So treating people fairly is a big thing for me. I also really focus a lot on kind of organizational health. So making sure that when you go into an organization and take on these kind of leadership roles, that you leave it stronger than you found it, much stronger sometimes in my case, because I've gone into organizations where, and you know, there's always different phases of development for organizations. Like I never go in and say, oh, like the last person, I don't know what they were doing, because it was in a different stage of development then. But yeah, I like to make sure that there's a proper solid strategy, foundation, fundraising, you know, the finances are right. And you have to have all of these things working together in order to strengthen something. So that's always my kind of objective, is to make sure that you're having an impact in whatever the goals that you've set for your life are. And I've always wanted to make change happen. I've done that in a lot of different ways and roles in my life. So yeah, I think I wouldn't say good, effective.
Nice. No, I would say you're a good leader. I was following what you were doing in social platform, and I was very sad when you left, and I told you I'm very sad that you're leaving. I think that it's a very important feature for a leader to be authentic and to live by your values. I think that's the very essential part of being a good leader, a truthful leader to yourself and your values, and then to the organization you represent. So yeah, I would say you're a good leader. And ELF, by the way, that's my favorite acronym in the whole EU bubble. How can you have a better acronym than that?
Yeah. ELFies. Sometimes that's what we call the staff. No, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a great acronym. I think that it doesn't really align with what we do. So sometimes I always have to be like, the European Liberal Forum. And it's funny, like the staff are always like, you are dropping the name left, right, and center and everything. And you have to be on message. So yeah, you can call us ELF once you know us, but if you don't know us, please Google the European Liberal Forum. We're on, obviously we have a website. We're on X. We're on Facebook, and you can also listen to our podcast.
It's a good podcast. But by the way, I'm sure that we're over an hour now, and we were discussing in the beginning that, we'll wrap up in 30 minutes, we'll be done. I told you, it will be an interesting conversation and people will listen to that. So we're wrapping up so we don't go over an hour. But the last two questions I always ask are the same. So what makes you happy and what makes you hopeful? And I ask those questions because I think that it's very good to humanize European leaders. And I think that it's very good to know what makes your brain tick, what makes you happy and what makes you hopeful. So this is why I'm asking you to elaborate now on those two.
What makes me happy? I love animals. I love, dogs, cats, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, in my personal life, this makes me happy. You know, I'm often very happy, going for a walk, going to a cafe with my dog. A good book makes me happy. A good podcast, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. We had a whole conversation about the length of podcasts. So
we totally disagree.
To your listeners, this is the time when you ask them, tell me, do you like the length? Is an hour too long? I don't know. Anyway, I was endorsing Maya to make them a bit shorter, but now I've just gone out. Talked. But you can still edit it out. I'm happy to be edited. I'm happy to be edited down. Good podcast. What makes me hopeful? I see a lot of kind of inspiring leaders now in the lead up to campaigning, and people sometimes who have had a little bit of a thrashing in national politics, and coming out of that and being hopeful and going for things. And there's a few, of the parties that we work with their political foundations who they have a lot of, and they're newer parties as well. I love seeing newer parties doing well and having like convincing people and out campaigning and canvassing. So that makes me hopeful for the state of democracy, which is that people still care. There's a lot of bad, I think, research on people becoming disillusioned, but then you see these kind of things happening, and you think, in very difficult circumstances, like in Poland, in Hungary, people rising up against that at great personal cost. That I find very hopeful and inspiring, that people are still willing to do that. And recent, as I said, results in Poland, that makes me hopeful as well. The tide can change. I'm Irish, so I've seen huge amounts of political change in my lifetime. So it's really important, I think, to keep hope. If you just give up, that's what they want. That's what people who want to reverse progress want. They want you to give up. They want you to give up hope. And I think they do that by very aggressive means. But if you have hope, you're already fighting back, I think, in some way. So that gives me hope. And I think, the last time around, we had a high voter turnout. I hope we get an even higher one now.
I hope so as well. And I believe we will.
And I genuinely believe that when a higher turnout happens, it's that more reasonable people come to the polls and they, and come to vote. So I believe that. Okay.
Well, let's leave it to that then. Hope, believe in a better future.
Yeah, anybody who's listening, if you are concerned about who is going to come into the European Parliament, then I encourage you, go and get involved and make sure that you're sending the right message. You're telling people what the European Union is doing, making sure that people vote for pro-EU progressive forces.
Okay, well, that's a very clear message, breaking the fourth wall.
Vote. I wanted to break the fourth. Yeah, go vote and make sure the people that are in your life go and vote as well.
Okay. I'm that annoying person who always tells everyone to vote, and I've been like that forever, and I will be like that as well. So go vote.
Go vote.
Okay. It's been such a pleasure to see you and have this not 30-minute conversation with you.
What's the time? Yeah. How long has it been?
I enjoyed it, and I'm very glad that we've met after quite a long pause since our previous meeting. In the meantime, subscribe, like the video, share it, find ELF, which stands for European Liberal Forum, and not for a roleplay game.
No.
And well, the last things that I always say are be kind, hug your dog, and we'll see each other next week with another interesting European leader. Thank you very much. Thanks, Alva.
You're so welcome.